If you drive through Colorado today and you look at the maps, you're going to see a name pop up more than once. Silverheels. There's Mount Silverheels that's down in Park County. There's a pass and a few other things that carry that name. And, the strange part is that name, it doesn't come from a mine owner. It doesn't come from a famous prospector. It doesn't come from some railroad tycoon. No. According to the stories, that came out of the gold camps. Yeah, that name, well, it actually comes from a dance hall girl. And if that sounds strange to you, well, welcome to the Colorado Gold Rush. Because the deeper that you dig, into the history of those boomtowns, the more that you're going to realize something. And that is that the real stories are rarely the ones about the men holding the gold pans. Sometimes the most important person in the entire camp, well, it was the one that everyone underestimated. The story begins in 1859, right in the middle of the Pike's Peak gold rush. Now, word had spread across the frontier that gold had been found in the mountains of what would soon become the state of Colorado. And when that kind of news hits, well, people get up and move, and they move fast. Prospectors, they just poured into the high valleys, chasing rumors of gold in places like South Park, right? A wide basin surrounded by mountains where creeks ran cold and, well, the ground was rich with placer deposits. Now, one of the biggest camps to rise up there, it was a place called Buckskin Joe. Now, Buckskin Joe, it was not a polite town, okay? It was a classic gold rush settlement. You had tents first, then you had rough cabins, well, and then saloons, and then gambling tables, and then dance halls. And before long, the full machinery of a boomtown just grinding away. Now, at its peak, the camp literally held thousands of miners that were working the surrounding creeks and hills. Gold was just coming out of the ground. And, when gold starts coming out of the ground, that money starts flowing. And, well, when money flows, people find ways to collect it. Now, somewhere in that chaotic early camp, a woman arrived. And her name, according to the stories that have survived, was Silverheels. Now, historians don't argue exactly on exactly where she came from, Some accounts say that she might have even been French, while others say that she might have, been of mixed heritage, possibly with Native American ancestry. But nearly every version of the story agrees on one thing. She worked in the dance halls of Buckskin Joe. In a mining camp that meant something very specific. You see, dance hall women, they weren't miners, but they were part of the economy, They danced with the miners, talked with them, they sometimes drank with them, and, the men, well, they paid for their time. Boomtowns, man, they were lonely places, hard places. And those dance halls were often the only places in town that felt even remotely civilized. So, the dance hall girls, they were well known. And Silverheels was apparently one of the most well known in the camp. Now, accounts describe her as striking, right, and confident, someone who stood out even in a town that was already full of characters. But the moment that turned her into a legend, right, it didn't come from the dance floor. No, it came from a disaster that rolled through the mining camps across the West. Smallpox. Now, in the early mining camps, disease could move even faster than the gold rumors. Miners, they lived so close together, right? You had cabins just packed tight and travelers arriving constantly from other camps and wagon routes. And when sickness arrived, well, it spread. And sometime in the early years of Buckskin Joe, well, smallpox, it came into the camp. Now, smallpox in the 1800s, you guys, it was terrifying, highly contagious, often deadly. And once people started getting sick, well, fear spread just as quickly as the actual disease itself. You would have miners begin just leaving town, and some would just flee to nearby camps, and others would just run for the mountains, hoping that distance would keep them safe. And then the camp just began to empty out. And the men who were already sick, well, they were left behind. So according to the stories that came out of Buckskin Joe, Silverheels did something almost no one else ever did. She stayed behind. So instead of fleeing the camp, she remained behind to help care for, the sick miners. Now, we have to be honest here, okay? Some parts of this story, they live firmly in legend territory, okay? Frontier towns loved to tell stories about heroic figures. But the core of it appears in multiple early accounts. Silverheels helping the sick, moving between cabins, bringing water, right? Trying to care for men who had no one else left in the camp. And so when the epidemic finally, burned itself out, well, the story takes another strange turn, because according to those very same accounts, well, Silverheels, she disappeared. Some versions say she caught smallpox herself and survived, okay, but was left scarred. And because she had once made her living, on her appearance, she chose to leave the camp quietly. But there are other versions that say that she simply vanished, once the worst of the sickness had passed. No clear records, okay? There's no grave that historians can confidently point to and say it's hers. Just a trail, right, that fades out in the historical record. But the miners remembered, and the story of the dance hall girl who stayed behind while others fled, that became part of the identity of the region. So when a nearby mountain was named, the miners, well, they chose a name they already knew: Silverheels. And that name stuck. Mount Silverheels, it still rises over South Park today. A reminder of a story that sits somewhere between frontier history and frontier legend. But even legends have roots. And this one, it grew out of a rough gold camp where thousands of men chased fortune in the creeks, while a woman from the dance halls became one of the most remembered figures in the entire district. It's a strange little piece of Colorado history for sure. But, when people talk about the gold rush, they usually talk about the miners. But every once in a while, the story, it actually belongs to somebody else. So if you enjoy these deep dives into the wild history of Colorado's mining camps, right? And I just need you to make sure that you subscribe to the channel. So hit the like button, right? So more people who love mining history can find the channel as well. And let's just go ahead and turn on the notifications. That way you don't, miss the next episode that I'm dropping out here. And as always, if you've ever heard another legend from an old mining town, you guys, drop that thing in the comments below. Because out here in the Rockies, the deeper you dig into the past, well, the stranger the stories actually become. All right, y'all. Thanks for hanging. I'll see you later.